Naidaghikam tapam ivo durajaha. Alampata shila dharo gunakaro. Hrishta parardhya vatito dukiteshu. Abhuta shatrur jagata shoka harta. Naithakikam tapam ivo durajaha. Alampata shiladharo gunakaro. Hrishta parardhya vyatito dhukiteshu. Abhuta shatru jagata shokaharta. Naidhaghikam tapam ivo durajaha. Alampata shiladharo gunakaro. Ishta parardhya vyatito dhukiteshu. Abhuta shatru jagata shokaharta. Naidaghikam tapam ivo durajaha. Alampataha, virtuous. Shiladharaha, qualified. Guna akaraha, reservoir of all good qualities. Hrishtaha, jolly. Pararidhya, by others' happiness. Vyatitaha, distressed. Dhukiteshu, in others' unhappiness. Abhuta shatruhu, without enemies. Jagataha, of all the universe. Shoka harta, destroyer of lamentation. Naidaghikam, due to the summer sun. Tapam, distress. Iva, likened. Udu rajaha, the moon. Translation. He will be a virtuously qualified reservoir of all good qualities. He will be jolly and happy in others' happiness, distressed in others' distress, and will have no enemies. He will be a destroyer of the lamentation of all the universes, like the pleasant moon after the summer sun. Purport. Prahlad Maharaj, the exemplary devotee of the Lord, had all the good qualities humanly possible. Although he was the emperor of this world, he was not profligate. Beginning from his childhood, he was the reservoir of all good qualities. Without enumerating those qualities, it is said here summarily that he was endowed with all good qualities. That is a sign of a pure devotee. The most important characteristic of a pure devotee is that he is not lampata, or licentious. And another quality is that he is always eager to mitigate the miseries of suffering humanity. The most obnoxious misery of a living entity is his forgetfulness of Krishna. A pure devotee, therefore, always tries to evoke everyone's Krishna consciousness. This is the panacea for all miseries. And again, the translation. He will be a virtuously qualified reservoir of all good qualities. He will be jolly and happy in others' happiness, distressed in others' distress, and will have no enemies. He will be a destroyer of the lamentation of all the universes, like the pleasant moon after the summer sun. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadama Hyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, today we are continuing our reading through this very famous section of Srimad Bhagavatam. Famous, of course, I think in many ways, because we always like to pick up the story in the 7th canto. But this section itself is very intriguing and interesting on its own. And we're hearing now the promise of the glories of Sri Prahlad Maharaj, right? And we're hearing all of these wonderful qualities. And what's interesting is when we look at yesterday's text, and I'm not saying that because I prepared for yesterday's text. Sometimes I see devotees do that. If they prepare for the wrong text, they'll say, if you look at yesterday's text or if you look at tomorrow's text. But genuinely, if we look at yesterday's text, we'll see that it glorifies him in terms of his devotion. That topmost devotee of the Lord will have expanded intelligence and expanded influence and will be the greatest of the great souls. Right? Due to mature devotional service, he will certainly be situated in transcendental ecstasy. So we're hearing this description in terms of his devotional qualities. But then what are we hearing today? He will be a virtuously qualified reservoir of all good qualities. He will be jolly and happy in others' happiness, distressed in others' distress, and will have no enemies, right? So we're hearing all of these other good qualities as well. And this is done because in this glorification, there's the implication that not only will Prahlad Maharaj be a great devotee, but because he is a great devotee, he will naturally have all of these other great qualities as well. It is not that when one becomes a devotee, one aspires to become devotee, when one is perfected in devotional service, that they're devoid of any good qualities, but rather they have all of the other good qualities as well, which naturally flow from bhakti. In the same way that we can say in the Bhagavad Gita, right? We hear that bhakti includes all of the other processes of yoga, right? All of the others are included in devotional service. So too, their benefits also are included in bhakti. And therefore, all of the material perfections, they come naturally from the execution of devotional service. In the same way that we say that the great reservoir of water, it fulfills the purpose of many wells. This applies equally to all of the qualities. When we have devotional qualities, all the other good qualities come as well. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he comments upon that text. And he says that actually, this text is referring to the fact that in the olden days in India, what they used to do in villages is they would have a different well for each purpose. So they'd have a well for washing the plates, they'd have a well for drinking the water, they'd have a well to get each type of water, right? But if a river was passing through a village, then the river would execute all of those purposes, right? So in the same way, the devotee, simply by the strength of his devotion, not by any extraneous or supplementary processes, he has all of these naturally good material qualities. And this will flow from Prahlad Maharaj. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he comments upon this in Jaiva Dharma. And he comments about it in relation to the good qualities of compassion and humility. And he says that compassion and humility, they do not flow separate to bhakti. Again, just as the same way as it is not that we receive some sort of perfection in Ashtanga Yoga or some perfection in Dhyana Yoga, that we are able to tame the mind, but instead simply by Krishna consciousness, it is a natural side effect, right? Or not even a side effect, but an essential part. If we are absorbed in Krishna, then our senses are completely absorbed in meditation upon him. In the same way, all of these sort of benefits, all these other qualities are inherent to bhakti. So we find humility. It proceeds when we go deeper and deeper into our devotional service. We'll think more and more, I'm the most fallen. And then it'll be a natural humility which flows. And when one chants the holy name of the Lord, one's heart is softened. And then naturally, compassion will follow. So all of these apparent material qualities, they come out in a more perfected form, even, when they are done and achieved through bhakti. Again, to come to the comparison of the Bhagavad Gita, when bhakti is independent and supreme, when it is the top of the yoga ladder, what do we find? It includes everything else, but it includes so much more as well. So in the same way, the devotee has all of these positive qualities, but he has them in a way that is more natural, more sustainable, and greater than one who achieves it through any other process. And so then, what are those natural qualities? It is compassion for all others, and it is all of these other wonderful things. Sometimes it is thought, right? We hear about how Krishna consciousness is the greatest philanthropy. And in a more neophyte understanding, there can be the understanding that therefore I see others and I'll just look away because I'm just meant to be chanting. I'm just meant to be preaching. So I'll see the suffering of others and, oh, that's just their karma. Or I'm doing something more important than caring about this poor person on the street. But actually, we find this is not the standard set by our acharyas or by the Srimad Bhagavatam, as is mentioned here. If anything else, the devotee should be more compassionate, should feel more for the sufferings of others. Because it is not that Krishna consciousness is something separate to that suffering. It is the answer to that suffering. As devotees, we concentrate on the greatest philanthropy of spreading Krishna consciousness, not because we are transcendental to suffering, but because we are most concerned with other sufferings. It is not that we feel that all of this is below us, all of this is for those who are materially intoxicated, but rather, not that it is beyond that, but rather it is very much for people who are materially intoxicated. That is the reason why we are engaged in spreading of Krishna consciousness. And therefore we hear Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. He was once walking with some of his Grihastha disciples, and they saw a beggar on the street, right? And they all just looked away, and they kept on walking. And Srila Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, the great philanthropist in the sense that very, very few personalities have spread Krishna consciousness as much as he did. He told them, give them some money. What is the point of all your sadhana if your heart is still so hard? So we find this. Sometimes it can be, in a very oversimplified sense, considered, I will not engage in any compassion. There's another example in Srila Prabhupada's pastimes. Once they were overlooking, Srila Prabhupada and a few of his senior disciples were overlooking the construction of one temple. And they saw all the laborers laboring away at the bottom. And Srila Prabhupada's disciple, I forgot who it was, he turned around and he said, Srila Prabhupada, I know this is just their karma. I know this is just because they're materialists. But I can't help but feel bad for them. And Srila Prabhupada's response was, why are you only feeling bad for them? We should be feeling bad for everyone. This compassion is, again, it's not an anartha. He was asking the question as if he was materially bewildered for feeling bad at this person's material condition. But Srila Prabhupada was making the point. This mood is very appropriate, and far from wanting less of it, we should want more of it. And therefore, we have this point, that Krishna consciousness, it includes all of these other things. And far from not giving material good qualities, it in fact generates them in the most sincere and most potent ways. And where do we find then these qualities? If it is in the devotee that we find this reservoir of all good qualities, then there is something interesting to be said, because all other processes won't necessarily produce this level of quality. So then it is often said, and I think very interestingly so, that it is the devotee who is the proof that Krishna exists, right? It is the devotee that is proof that spiritual life is true, that it can have some benefit. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, when discussing faith, what does he define faith as? He defines faith as having confidence that by the execution of this bhakti yoga process, I will have the fruit, I will have the result, right? By the execution of this process, I will not have any second guesses about the fruit that I will gain from it. And therefore, when he discusses doubt, what does he say a doubter is? It's interesting, because when we hear the word doubt, we think of somebody who doesn't believe, right, in the Srimad Bhagavatam or something, or he struggles to believe that Krishna exists. And that's what we think, but this isn't what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur focuses upon. When he discusses faith, he says, it is a person, when he discusses doubt, he says the doubtful person is a person who has read too much, and having had read too much, he has now become confused about the conclusion of all that he has read. The person who is filled with doubts is the person who, while executing devotional service, is not confident that he will gain the result of devotion from it. This is what doubt is. And therefore, if that is what doubt is, then what is faith? But the firm conviction that this devotional service, this process of bhakti yoga, will produce some fruit. And then who are the great evidences of that? Not even Krishna himself could be an evidence of that, but his devotees are. And how do we know this? We know this from the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So glorified is the position of the devotee that even Krishna, wants to get in on it, right? Even Krishna is thinking, well, this is something special, right? So we find in this way, the glories of the devotee are incredible. And because of those glories, we can maybe think to begin to have some sort of faith in Krishna consciousness. Because Krishna consciousness is absurd. And of course, I'll want to qualify that statement. But Krishna consciousness is very absurd. It's very weird. It makes very and little to no sense, right? And how is that so? It makes little to no sense because it is very transcendental to all of the sense that we understand, right? Everything that we think of in this world as making sense makes no sense in Krishna consciousness. Here, what do we say? What is one of the universal things, one of the first steps that we say when preaching Krishna consciousness? We say, you are not this body, right? How many times we say this again and again and again? And maybe one day in my case I'll realize it. Whenever I have to have a cold shower, I realize that deep down I still think I am my body. So, we are not this body. That is what we say in this world, right? And yet if we go to the spiritual world, if we were to go on a little stroll there and we were to ask somebody, or tell them, you are not this body, what would they say? They'd say, no, I am this body, because they are their body there. So the whole logic is upside down. It's all very, very different. We can think of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was traveling through South India, he stayed at the house of Ekanta Bhatta, right? And staying there, this was a very pious and intelligent man. And how does he preach to him? Does he preach with these sophisticated arguments? Does he preach by applying logic? No, what does he do? He says, Lakshmi Devi, she is so chaste, and yet she longs to have pastimes with Krishna. And what does Vaikunta Bhatta say? He says, stop joking like this, right? Why are you joking like this? It's all right. Krishna and Narayan, they're one and the same. And what does Mahaprabhu say? Mahaprabhu says, yes, that's all very well and good, right? But then why wasn't she allowed to enter in to the pastimes of Goloka? And at this point, Vaikunta Bhatta, his mind almost cracks, right? His mind almost snaps. How does Mahaprabhu convince this pious follower of the Sri Sampradaya, of Krishna consciousness, of the supremacy, of the Gauriya Vedanta conclusion? He does so by joking. By jokes, he has undermined the thought process of the material world. Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya. How is Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya, the great orator, the great teacher, the great speaker? How is he refuted? How does he have the first crack in his perfect arguments made? Mahaprabhu is silent. Through silence, Mahaprabhu cracks through the mindset of Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya. And at that point, he becomes ready to hear the conclusions of Gauriya Vedanta. These are interesting points, right? How would people normally, according to the rules of this world, how would they normally seek to refute a person like Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya? They would argue for 7 days as well. How does Mahaprabhu refute Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya and refute him so strongly that he then renounces his Mayavad? Through silence. by not speaking a word. So often today, we'll see that some devotees, they'll learn all of these different complex arguments to explain why Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? But is Mahaprabhu using complex arguments? He's joking. And through his jokes, he's explaining this. We find this even in Srila Prabhupada, right? Srila Prabhupada, when he makes arguments, I've realized this whenever I listen. Prabhupada's arguments, they cut right to the core, but they're never what we would call these sophisticated logical arguments. He never says this, therefore that, this, therefore that. Sometimes he says things which are almost a little bit out there, but there's this potency. We can see this logic coming through, but it's a very transcendental logic. And therefore, one of the Christian church fathers, he has this very wonderful quote. And he says, religion must be true because it is so absurd. And only the truth can be so absurd. Because only something which is transcendental can be absurd in this way, where even though it contradicts the way we understand the world, it contradicts it in a way that makes a whole lot more sense than the world itself does. And so this is the transcendental nature of spirituality, and then this is the exemplary position of the devotee. Because the Vaishnava walking through the world walks through it, but how does he act, right? Again, to come back to the Bhagavad Gita, we hear all of these descriptions of Nishkama Karma Yoga, of acting but being detached from the world, right? Acting but not acting within the world. But these are so much more fulfilled by the devotee, right? Because the Nishkama Karma Yogi, he acts in a way where he is acting in the world, but he does not act according to the rules of this world. But the devotee, he acts in this world, but he acts in the rules of another world. And therefore we see the manifestation of something very transcendental and unique. And then we find that in devotees like Prahlad Maharaj, like Srila Prabhupada. There's a famous glorification by one academic who was one of the first to study ISKCON. And he said the story of Srila Prabhupada, this 70-year-old Indian man, right, having several heart attacks, coming down with nothing, a few books, just a few pennies here and there. And then in under a decade, establishing such a great and grand religious movement. If you told anyone, they'd think you're lying. They think you're saying some sort of hagiography, right? It's like when you read, in the Middle Ages, you'll read all these biographies of saints, and you can tell the stories have gotten more and more exaggerated as they've gone along. Wherever they step, flowers pop out, and stuff like that, right? You'd think it'd be something like that. It's so exaggerated. It's so insane. And it is. The story of Srila Prabhupada, in many ways, it is absurd to the logic of our world. And that is what makes it so true. That is what makes it so pertinent. That's what makes it so powerful. Because the pastimes of the Lord, they act on a different platform. And acting on that different platform, they strike through everything that we think of, everything that we assume in the nature of this world. So this is the nature of the devotee. And we find this. We find this throughout the pastimes of the Lord. And because of this, then, we can say, almost it's like we're seeing a one-sided conversation, right? We're seeing the devotee and the Supreme Lord, right? We're seeing Srila Prabhupada, we're seeing Prahlad Maharaj, we're seeing all of the great sadhus that are manifestly present on the earth today. And we see their lives that they're living are very unique, they're very powerful. And because of this, we are seeing one half of a conversation almost. And so we can infer two things. Either these people are mad, or there is somebody else on the other side of the conversation. But then how can we say that these people are mad, these individuals are mad, when they are more lucid than anyone else on earth, right? When they're cutting through the madness that everyone else is suffering from, how can we say that they are mad? They've proven themselves to be more sober, more sane than everyone else in this world. So therefore then, maybe we can take the conversation they have very seriously. Because again, what they've done is very, very special. We see sometimes, I'll hear devotees, they'll glorify Srila Prabhupada, and with all respect to their respect of Srila Prabhupada, it's sometimes very peculiar what they decide to glorify Srila Prabhupada with. You'll hear people say all of these fantastic stories of how Prabhupada cured somebody's cancer, or Prabhupada, he produced... I remember I was hearing this one, Mataji was telling me that Srila Prabhupada, he appeared and help somebody break out of prison or something like that. And I mean, Srila Prabhupada can do it, and all glories to their faith. But this is not the faith that Srila Prabhupada wanted to inculcate, right? When Srila Prabhupada was asked, what is your miracle? What did he do? He pointed to his disciples and he said, these are my miracles. Because again, we want to go to the logic of our world, and we think in the logic of our world, what will prove to us the validity of this personality? What will prove to us that something special is happening? Oh, if the laws of physics are broken. Oh, if any of these special things are happening. And so we reduce Srila Prabhupada to the level of a magician. But Srila Prabhupada is much, much greater than a magician. What he is producing is Krishna consciousness. And therefore, sometimes people, they'll ask, right? They'll ask all sorts of material questions. So often I get asked regarding the Bhagavad Purana or even the Bhagavad Gita, right? Oh, we're hearing about the Bhagavad Gita, and on the battlefield there's so many warriors. We're hearing these descriptions. Where are all the bones in Kurukshetra? Where are all the bones? Prabhu, where are the bones? They'll ask. They're so adamant on finding out where are the remnants, where's the armor, where are all the bones? But they've missed the more impossible part of the Bhagavad Gita. The impossible part isn't that we struggle to find a bone or two. The impossible part is that Arjuna conquered his ego. That Arjuna entered into devotional service. That's the impossible part. If you read the Bhagavad Gita and you want to find something that is unbelievable, it's not that so many armies were present on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. It's that somebody was able to conquer over their ahankar and enter into devotional service to Krishna. That is the real miracle, and that's the real absurd part. There's a pastime, Srila Tripurari Maharaj, in the early days of ISKCON. He was on book distribution. We all know Tripurari Maharaj. Srila Prabhupada said, the incarnation of book distribution. And so he was out on book distribution, and he came across an evangelical Christian. And I'm sure we've all had the experience with evangelical Christians, right? And this evangelical Christian, he was saying, oh, you know, there's so much evidence, Jesus Christ, he died and he came back from the dead, and therefore you should become a Christian, right? How amazing is that? Jesus Christ, he died and he came back from the dead, right? And Tripurari Maharaj, he said, I haven't read the Bible. But from what I know about the Bible, Jesus dying and coming back from the dead is not the greatest miracle that I hear there. The greatest miracle that I hear in the Bible is that when he was on that cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That somebody could genuinely feel that much compassion for all these living entities, that is a far greater miracle than dying and coming back from the dead. So all of these apparently mundane things are so incredibly elevated, and they are naturally the fruits of the devotees. So we find there, right? People will ask, where are the bones? Where are the bones? But they should be asking, where are the arjunas? Where are the arjunas that I can see that somebody can actually do this? That somebody can actually conquer their ego? That somebody can actually enter into the depths of Krishna consciousness? This is the question, right? And I tell them, it sort of reminds me of Shakshi Gopal, right? What do we hear in the Shakshi Gopal pastimes in Chaitanya Charitamrita? What does the young Brahmin say? He says, Pratima noho tumi. My Lord, you are not a statue. And in many ways, I feel like I can say the same thing to the devotee who wonders that. Where are the bones? My Lord, you are also not a set of bones. Because we look for things which fit into our understanding of the world. We think of archaeology, we think of bones, we think of mathematics, we think of logical proofs. We think of all of these things. But Krishna is not that. Krishna is not an archaeological artifact. Krishna is not a logical proof. So then how do we encounter Krishna? If we do not encounter him in the logical proofs, where do we encounter him? If the Lord that I'm trying to worship is not a set of bones, then what is he? Where is he? He is dancing on the tongue of the pure devotee. That is where he is. How does Srila Prabhupada spread Krishna consciousness? He sits under a tree and he chants, right? That is where we encounter. Even if you could take a time machine, people sometimes say, they want all this sort of evidence and logical proofs. Even if you took a time machine and went and saw Krishna, there were a lot of people who had the opportunity to see Krishna. We can think of the wrestling arena of Kamsa, right? They were right there. They saw Krishna right in front of them. And what did they see? Some saw death personified. Some saw their relative. Some saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Others saw the impersonal Brahman, right? It is not simply that by seeing Krishna, we will have the appropriate ability to appreciate him, that we will necessarily have that faith. They saw Krishna right in front of them, and they saw all sorts of bogus things, right? Also a lot of bona fide things, mind you. But that's the point, right? What differentiates the people in that crowd who are seeing Krishna? The devotees saw what was actually there, and the non-devotees saw what was not there. So in the association of the devotees even today, we are able to appreciate Krishna even better than the people there who saw Krishna directly. When we are in the presence of the pure devotees, when we are receiving the mercy of the pure devotees, then we are able to see Krishna in a much deeper way than even the people who quite literally saw Krishna, because we can see Krishna as he is. And again, what is that? That is not a logical proof. It is not a set of bones in the ground, but it is a transcendental living person, right? The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who dances on the tongues of the devotees. And therefore, to come back to that point, the devotees are the proof of Krishna in this world, right? Because on their tongue, Krishna dances. In their heart, Krishna resides. And in this way, we understand Krishna consciousness. And this is why the parampara is so important, right? Because the devotees, they always stand, sometimes it's described like lighthouses on the shore, right? If we are drowning, and we are drowning, samsara davana, nalalidha loka, right? It's a forest fire, but it's also very much an ocean, a tsunami that we are drowning in, of material sufferings. So in all of this drowning, if we do not know there is a shore, we will despair. We will suffer, we will worry. But the pure Vaishnavas, what are they? They are like lighthouses on the shore. They remind us, oh, there is land, right? There's not just this Maya. There's not just drowning and drowning for birth after birth, for time immemorial. There is shore. And where they are standing, that is where the shore is. So by the devotee, by the transcendental qualities of the devotee, we can see, oh, there is a shore. There is a destination. There is somewhere where there is stability. And like a lighthouse, their qualities, they shine out. We hear this again in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Madhavendra Puri, Krishna's Kaviraj Thakur, he describes, wherever Madhavendra Puri went, like a shadow, his fame would follow. Why? Because these individuals, these personalities, they stand out like a lighthouse, right? Their qualities are so transcendental, they're so different, they're so absurd, again, to our logic of the world. So in this way, we find the parampara is so important, because in each generation then, what do we find? We find the devotees are there constantly edifying this, constantly reinforcing this. Here is the devotee, and therefore Krishna is real, and therefore we can see the reality of Krishna. Why does the devotee have all these good qualities? Because the devotee is fully surrendered unto Krishna, and Krishna is the reservoir of all good qualities, right? We hear this just the same as the iron rod, when it is put into fire, it takes the qualities of fire. In the same way, the pure devotee has all the wonderful qualities of Krishna. It's described, and I'm now forgetting the Sanskrit word. It's described, the color of Balaram. I forgot the Sanskrit word for it. It's champak or something. And what it means is, it means like a crystal. This is the color that Balaram is described as in Radha Krishna Ganadesha Deepika. He's described with this color. Like a crystal he is described. White, like a gem. And I found this is a very interesting description. Because the Vaishnavas, of course, especially the gurus in our parampara, they're all empowered by Balaram, are they not, right? They're all empowered by Balaram, who is the Guru Tattva. And if they're empowered by Balaram, then we can sort of think there is some sort of empowerment there. And so I sort of think of Balaram, he's the Akhanda Guru Tattva. He is the Guru, right? He is the transcendental part of the Guru, which empowers the Guru we see before us, right? The manifestation of that Guru Tattva. So then, what does it mean for him to be like a crystal? I sort of think of a crystal to be like reflecting light, right? The light of Krishna fully reflects into a crystal and it radiates outwards. In the same way, the empowered Guru, the empowered Vaishnava, empowered by Balaram, is also having that crystal-like color, Not in the literal sense that we hear of with Balaram, but in the sense that they reflect, they are the transparent via media. All of these qualities of Krishna are reflected into the world. And so generation after generation, the parampara continues, shining that light of the beautiful qualities of Krishna into this world. And we find it go on and on and on. And each step will be different, right? Because the world changes, right? So the way that light reflects onto the world is different. The shadow that the world casts as the light shines on it is different, right? Because the world is always changing. But that's fine, because Krishna is always changing as well. What is Krishna? He is a dancer. So this world, it changes, but Krishna, he dances along with it very happily. And who does he dance with? He dances with his devotee. And so throughout history, Krishna will dance differently with his different devotees, and that is the beauty of the parampara, that it is dynamic. We sometimes think of the parampara as being the static thing, right? It's a thing which it's the exact same generation after generation, right? The same knowledge, and it is the same knowledge. But what is that knowledge? Is it the knowledge of how to wear a dhoti? Is it the knowledge of what color we wear? Is it the knowledge of what language we speak? Is it the knowledge of which books we use? No. It's the knowledge of the love of Krishna. It's the knowledge of the holy name. And that is passed down perfectly. And therefore, sometimes people get bewildered. They'll study the parampara and they'll see nobody, brahmacharis didn't wear saffron before Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, right? They'll read, oh, well, forget about brahmacharis wearing saffron. Barely anyone wore saffron, right? Because there wasn't even sannyas before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. They'll hear that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he was initiated, he received the full-style Babaji initiation. He received his whole identity in the spiritual world. We definitely don't do that, and for good reason we don't do that. I'm not saying we should reintroduce it, right? But we'll hear that and we'll think, oh, well, there's differences. It's not the same. But it is the same when we realize what are they passing down. They're passing down the Sankirtan. They're passing down that dance with Krishna, right? And under their guidance, all of these small details are there. All of the details of what color to wear, what types of monks to become, right? What types of books to read, which ways we realize our transcendental form. All of these descriptions are there because they're given specifically to us, and they must change because us, right? Those of us who are not within that transcendental dance, right? We are always changing. And so relevant to how we change, the devotees, they dance with Krishna, and then they dance accordingly to that. And therefore, what are the Vaishnavas called? Jiva Goswami calls them the Kripa Shakti. We are, of course, Tatastha Shakti, right? But they are the Kripa Shakti. They are the mercy potency of the Lord. And therefore, then, what else is the parampara? The parampara is simply the footsteps of Krishna and his devotee dancing through history. That is all that the parampara is, right? But when we say that is all that is, that's a very great thing, right? So in this way, the devotees throughout history, they're manifesting all these transcendental qualities. And they're manifesting them in different ways, reciprocating differently with Krishna, right? So what is the parampara? The parampara is the dance of Krishna with his devotee throughout history. So then, we find this is the nature of the devotee, the transcendental value of the devotee. How exemplary are they? They're manifesting all of these qualities which come from all sorts of processes, and we find them here. So then, I was sort of reflecting on this. And I was reflecting on the nature, the value of devotion. Because we're finding here, in many ways also, those good qualities are being focused upon in order to glorify devotion, right? These good qualities that we do understand, right? Compassion, so and so. These are qualities we have some sort of understanding in our material conceptions. And therefore, it's like a finger pointing to the moon, right? When we glorify these qualities on their own, right? They're pointing, oh, there's something very great that these individuals have perfected, those qualities we do have an understanding of. So then I was reflecting on this, and I was reflecting on the pastime, a famous pastime, right? Of that Brahmin, right? That Brahmin who went with Krishna to school, right? We know Krishna, he spent his pastimes under the tutelage of, I'm mind blanking, his Sandipani Muni, right? The Shaivite. No, the Shaivite, what's his name? No, it is Sandipani Muni, yeah. So Sandipani Muni, we know Krishna, he spends his time under his tutelage. And sometimes people wonder, why is he a Shaivite, right? Shouldn't he be a Vaishnav, right? Why is Krishna giving such an elevated position to a Shaivite, right? Of course, we worship Shiva, and we will even give all our respects to the devotees of Shiva. But it's a little odd. We would think normally in Krishna's pastimes, all the personalities, who are they? They're Vaishnavas, right? So why is Krishna engaging in his pastime in such an intimate and prominent role as Shaiva? And this is because a Vaishnav would struggle to be the guru of Krishna, right? Somebody who worships Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he would not be able to instruct Krishna what to do. He would not be able to go to Krishna and say, this is my dakshina, right? Get me this, please. He would not be able to say, go fetch the wood, right? But a Shaivite can, right? A Shaiva can, right? Because he is not under that Vaishnav conception. He doesn't have that mood where he would be so distraught to command around the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And because of this, he is engaged. And interestingly enough, it's sometimes mentioned that because of this, Sandipani Muni actually had some favoritism towards Balaram. Because he's a Shaivite, right? And who does Shiva worship? Who is Shiva's Ishtadev? Sankarshan, right? And who is Sankarshan an expansion of Balaram, right? So because of this, actually, it's interesting. Sandipani Muni, he had a specific sort of favoritism to Balaram, right? Because it all came out in that mood. So still, that mood couldn't be violated, right? Even though that mood was there, so that he would be able to order Krishna around. Still, he had a rather soft spot for Balaram. And so we know very sweetly, all of them, they got along. Krishna, Balaram, and of course, Sadama. And why Sadama? Sometimes this is also explained. Sadama, Krishna had a very fond place in his heart. Can anyone guess why? Sadama in particular. Because of course Krishna, when he was in Vrindavan, he had a very special friend named Sadama as well. And because of that, there's almost that nostalgia there, right? It's the same with Arjuna. We have Arjuna on the battlefield. We also have Arjuna Gopa in Vrindavan, right? And Krishna, why is he such a close friend with Arjuna in Kurukshetra? There's that affection that's already there for Arjuna, the other Arjuna, right? It reminds him almost. Of course, these are all eternal personalities, and we never have a point where this friendship develops. But in the terms of the pastime, it acts out like this. He says, oh, I knew an Arjuna. And suddenly, we see this, right? When parents even, if we think of a material analogy, when parents, they see a child that reminds them of their child, suddenly they're more affectionate to that child than they would be to a normal child, right? In the same way, Krishna, he's seeing Sadama, Arjuna. This is reminding me of Vrindavan, all of my dear friends back then. So he has these strong, friendly relationships. So anyways, as their lives go on, Sadama, he becomes very destitute, right? Because he's very renounced. What's interesting is our acharyas actually say that his wife was more renounced than he was. We find this description. Because when she would beg for food, she would give all that she could to her husband, and then she would leave nothing. She would first give whatever she could to her husband, and she would only take 1 or 2 grains. So often we hear the glories of Sadama, right? How renounced he was. But actually our acharyas say his wife was even more renounced. But they were very much struggling. Why? Because whatever little they would get, he would be so renounced, he would simply offer it away, right? And so like this, they would struggle. And so at one point, his wife, she approached him, and she said, we've got to resolve this, right? This is very difficult. We are both so emancipated. And actually it's described in Srimad Bhagavatam that she was shaking when she asked this. And sometimes people think she was shaking out of hunger. Sometimes this is the description that sometimes people, they infer. But actually it's described she was shaking because she was afraid to ask the Supreme Lord for anything else other than devotion. She was shaking, being revolted by that thought. Again, we can think, what is the transcendental character of the pure devotees? When I miss one meal, I'm shaking with eagerness to get fed, right? I'll happily come to the temple, and sometimes, sometimes I'll think, okay, now I'll eat, darshan's finished, now it's time for me to honor prasad. It's not the most elevated thought, I'm not presenting it as that, but sometimes I think, okay, now I'm hungry, now I'm going to go and eat, right? But what is she thinking? She's thinking, oh, I'm shaking at the idea of going to the Lord and asking for anything else than pure devotion. So like this, she's shaking when she's asking sadama. And then, of course, she says, your friend Krishna, he's become something big now, hasn't he? Why didn't you go ask him? Sadama, he thinks all of these different things. He has all these different arguments. He thinks, oh, I'm just a destitute person. I have nothing. Anyways, why would he think of me? Krishna's thinking of all of these elevated personalities, not of somebody destitute like me. And then his wife, she does the perfect argument, right? And we see this in Vaishnav dealings, right? It's very funny. When I'm with my non-devotee friends, when we banter, it's about putting the other person down, right? It's about, you jokingly insult your friends, right? But when we're with devotees, we're jokingly insulting ourselves, right? We're putting ourselves on the lower and lower position. That's what I've realized. We use the same wit, I've realized, the same wit that you normally use to mock your friends, of course friendly. But we use it among devotees. We use that same wit in order to find a way to denigrate ourselves in relation to others, right? So this is at least the way we aspire to think, right? And so he was very much thinking this way. In each argument his wife would give, he would think of another way to say, no, I'm the lowest, I'm the lowest. And then at one point she says, well, Krishna, he is very merciful upon the destitute. He's very merciful upon those who are struggling. And then he thinks, oh, well, I can't really argue with that, can I? And so he goes. And he travels over then to Dwarka. And he arrives, and he actually walks very naturally through all of the defenses, everything. This simple Brahmin with torn clothes and his veins popping out, right? All of these big, it's described there, these 3 big camps and towers, which all Krishna's armies are situated in. And he just naturally strolls through them. And he arrives into one of Krishna's castles, right? And this is one in which he is there with his wife. Does anyone know which wife it is in this pastime? Yes, Rukmini. Because sometimes in some Puranas it's listed that it's Saibya, but our acharyas have said this is wrong. So sometimes, because some manuscripts of the Bhagavatam, they have that detail. Sometimes, and that's, again, one reason why it's so important to make sure all of our literatures are coming in our line. Because sometimes if you go to those big Bhagavad Saptahas and all, they will all say it wasn't Rukmini, it was Saibya instead, right? So, now, I think it's Saibya, who's listed in some of them, one of the wives of Krishna, right? And so they'll say it was her, but our acharyas have rejected this. And they've said it is indefinitely Rukmini. So he goes in, and we all know, very famous pastime, right? Krishna, he embraces him. He embraces him, and it's described that Rukmini, she was thinking, oh, and not only Rukmini, but everyone in Dwarka was thinking, here's this Avadhut, and what is Krishna doing embracing him, right? We can think, again, this doesn't really make sense to us, does it, right? It didn't make sense to the people there, right? They were all confused to see this, again, because Krishna consciousness has that absurdity. It is absurd to the rules and logic that we think of in this world. But in order to understand it, we have to become fluent in that language. I often think when we travel around the world, we have to learn the language of the place we're in to truly fit in, right? When we are in Sydney, we learn English, right? If we go to Jagannath Puri, we have to learn Uriya. When we go to Vrindavan, we have to learn Hindi. When we go to Mayapur, we have to learn Russian. We have to learn the local language, right, of each place, right? And so, in this same way, it won't make sense to us unless we learn the language. So, unless we learn that language of bhakti, it's all. There's a saying. It's all Greek to me, right? I've heard it's all Greek to me. I've heard it's all French to me. Either way, it's all bhakti to me until we learn the language of bhakti. All of these things are upside down, and that's why, again, another reason we don't enter into these higher pastimes in our reading, in our study, in our meditation. Not these higher pastimes, meaning these ones, but the very esoteric ones, right? Those rasic pastimes. Because until we have the fluency in that language of bhakti, we will misunderstand. We will try to understand it in the terms of the language of this world that we do understand, right? Anyways, so with that fluency, there was some confusion, And Krishna, he is embracing this Brahmin with his torn up clothes, and there's Krishna so wonderful, and he's embracing him so wonderfully, right? And we know like this, he embraces him, he washes his feet, all of these standard things. We've heard this pastime, and it's a very sweet pastime. And then Krishna, he begins to reminisce about their times, right? All of their sweet pastimes together in the Gurukul. Of course, Krishna knows why he's there, right? And so Krishna, he begins to ask, oh, I think you've brought something for me. Of course, Sadama, he's very embarrassed, right? To present the chipped rice, right? And as we know, Krishna, he eventually gets it and he relishes it so much. He has a few and he says, oh, is there any more? And he takes more, and very sweetly. And then he quotes that famous line from the Bhagavad Gita, right? Which one does he quote? Patram pushpam phalam toyam, right? He quotes this famous text. And there's a very interesting note that gets made by our acharyas on this text. Because what's listed there, what do we hear? We hear there's water. What else is listed? Of what can we offer Krishna according to that text? Flower, fruit, leaf, all of these things. And one thing that's interesting is that people will often note, when we see this list, flowers aren't very edible, are they? Nor are leaves. I mean, you can cook leaves, but by and large, they're not the most edible things. And yet, what does Krishna say? Krishna doesn't say, I accept them. He quite literally says, I eat them, right? So what's happening there? Our acharyas actually say Krishna becomes so maddened by his love for the devotee that he doesn't even realize he's eating flowers. He doesn't even realize he's eating leaves. He becomes so intoxicated by what the devotee offers that he thinks, I don't care what it is, right? I'm just going to honor it. He becomes so in love with his devotee. And so we find this here. Chipped flat rice. I mean, yeah, definitely not today on Ekadashi. I wouldn't want to be having it. But even if it's not Ekadashi, I might want to pass on it, right? But there, Krishna, he's relishing it, right? He's eating it like that. Why? Because he's maddened by the love of his devotee. And like that, he simply consumes. And he says, I want more, right? I remember I was at one devotee's house, and obviously I won't say the name because of the story, and he was very happy to make some upma for me, right? And the thing is, he was very proud of his upma. But I think he's the only person who's ever been proud of his upma because it's very dry. It wasn't very well made, right? And so obviously out of etiquette, and I was thinking, actually I should be thinking about honoring prasadam, not about my sense gratification. So I just thought, like the tortoise pulls his limbs into his body, I'm going to pull my senses in. I'm just going to quickly eat this. And so I just went like that, I just thought I'm going to eat this quickly. And I ate it so quickly. I thought, jai, And then he said, oh, Prabhu, you like it so much. And he instantly put another spoon onto my plate. And I thought, oh, no, Prabhu. So, and then I thought, this time I have to do it slowly. So then slowly I was going through, oh, Prabhu, I'm sorry, I'm just so full. I would love to have more. But so that's what I think. I think about that with this pastime, If it was like that, I can't imagine what a bit of flat rice will be. But what is Krishna saying? Krishna is sincerely saying, give me more, give me more, give me more, right? I want more of it. So this is what Krishna says. And so, in this way, Krishna, he's honoring it. And then we can think again, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Veda vid, Vedanta krid, or is it Veda krid, Vedanta vid? I always get it mixed up, which way around it goes. But we can definitely say all knowledge comes from him, right? He is so aware of everything. All logic, all mathematics, everything springs forth from Krishna, right? And it springs forth not even directly from him, right? These causal relationships, they're all very much about the nature of this world, right? It's just a fraction of what he knows. And yet that same Krishna is rendered so incompetent to even be able to identify the different items before him because he's so maddened by the love of his devotee. Again, this is very hard for us to grasp, but this is the transcendental nature of the devotee. So then, like this, he keeps on going. And then eventually, Sadama leaves, right? And he leaves poor as anyways. He thinks, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he knows what I want in my heart, right? He knows why I came. But honestly, he didn't give me any because he knew the moment I would get any riches, I would forget him, right? So out of his causeless mercy, he has allowed me to stay in poverty. Again, it seems absurd to the non-devotee to hear that. The causeless mercy of the Lord is that I'm impoverished, right? Absurdity. And yet it is so true. Things like that, as I said, they're so absurd they are true. They are absurd in a way that only the truth can be, right? So with this meditation, he walks back home. And then, of course, we know he sees these majestic, wonderful building, greater than anything any of the demigods have. And then, of course, his wife comes out, and she looks like she's straight from the heavenly planets. He thinks, whose house is this, right? His qualities are left the same. He is left with his veins showing and all. And the reason why is so that his wife can recognize him. Because if he were to come back looking all fantastic, she'll think, oh, that's just the neighbor. Just walk a few blocks down the street and you'll get home, right? But he's left in that position so that his wife recognizes him. And then he wonders, right? He wonders the question that often people wonder. Why didn't Krishna give me this blessing before, right? Why did Krishna not tell me when he sent me out to walk, right? Why didn't Krishna tell me that he had given all of this? And the reason why, as he reflects, is he thinks, well, actually, the reason why is Krishna was embarrassed. Krishna was embarrassed, and this is what our acharyas say. Krishna was embarrassed that Sadama had given Krishna so much. He had given him all of these chipped grain rices, these chipped flat rice, right? He'd given him all of that, and all Krishna could give him was all of the wealth of the demigods. Krishna was embarrassed. I'm giving him so little compared to how much he has given me. Again, absurd, right? A few grains of rice. How can that compare to all the wealth of the demigods? Very absurd by a material calculation, but by the devotional calculation, it makes perfect sense, right? So Krishna, in shame, he didn't want to tell, this is what I'm going to give you, because he would have felt embarrassed, right? How can I give you so little? You are my friend, you have given me so much wealth, such a great blessing you have given me, and I'm only going to give you a few nice houses? I'm only going to give you greater wealth than any of the demigods? How could I be so obnoxious as to do that? This was Krishna's meditation, and therefore Krishna did not mention it. So this is the nature of devotion. This is how it flips around all of our rules. This is how it flips around all of our understandings. But it does so not in the way that lies are absurd, not in the way that falsehoods are absurd, but in a greater way, the way the truths are absurd. So then, to come full point, to full circle, how does Mahaprabhu then, in light of the way that bhakti works like this? Sometimes people will say, oh, I hear these pastimes of Krishna and animals are talking. I can't believe this. I still remember one youth, this Mataji, she was doing speech pathology. And she was saying, it's not physiologically possible for an animal to produce the sounds for speech. How can I believe this? And it's because the laws of physics, they pertain to this world. But the spiritual world is not run by the laws of physics. It is run by laws, but it is the laws of love. It is the laws of bhakti. It is the laws of beauty. Why did the animals speak in the spiritual world? Because it is beautiful, because it is sweet, because it is reflective of the infinite beauty that the spiritual world has. We hear in the Bhagavad Gita, does the spiritual world need any light? No. But we hear as well in Shastra that there is a moon in Goloka Vrindavan, in the spiritual world. Why is there a moon if there is no need for light? Because what else would Krishna